Now that we've gone through the rules, let's take a look at a couple examples that look more similar to what you might see on the test and try to apply the rules that we learned into figuring out the answers for these questions. So in this question we have, as the performers stepped on stage, they sang and danced to a sound that embodied their unique culture. So when I see the word unique culture after the word there, I know that this is a possessive pronoun. So it's talking about the unique culture belonging to them. So whenever you have a question that seems to be asking a question on possessives, then you should always ask yourself, what is the antecedent in this sentence? So in other words, what is the there referring to? It's probably referring to the performers, right? So now that we know that we are referring to the performers, which are people, we know that we can eliminate options C and D because we do not use the pronoun it to talk about people. So we have a choice between option A, which is THEIR, and option B, which is THEY''RE. So which one is the possessive and which one is the contraction? If you thought the second one was a contraction, then you're absolutely right. There with an apostrophe is a contraction for the words they are. So whenever you have a contraction, all you need to do is just plug in the full word into the sentence to see if it makes sense. So then we would get, as the performers stepped on stage, they sang and danced to a sound that embodied their unique culture. That obviously does not make sense, so we know that option B is incorrect. So option A has to be the correct answer. By the way, if you didn't notice this before, option D is actually a non-existent word. So doesn't matter because as long as you determine that you are talking about people, then you would have eliminated these options right away, but just so you remember, this is not a word. Another tip that you should remember for answering questions with apostrophes is that sometimes you need to determine whether the noun is meant to be plural or singular. So this is when we're talking about possessives. So in this question we have, the waiter had misinterpreted my friend's question as an impolite request to bring the dish. So right away when we're reading it, we can tell that the question belongs to the friend, right? Which means that we need a possessive. So once we've determined that, then we can go through the options and just look for the possessive form of the noun friend. In A, we just have friends, just a plural subject, meaning just more than one friend. In option B, we have an apostrophe after the plural subject friends, so we know that this is a possessive. And then option C, we have an apostrophe S, which tells me that this is also a possessive. And option D, we have nothing, which is the same problem with option A, meaning it's just a plural subject, it's not a possessive. So we can eliminate right away options A and options D. So that leaves us with just two options, option B and option C. So now we need to decide whether we are talking about just one friend or two friends. Logically, it was probably just one friend that asked the question, but this would just become more evident after you've read the passage. So if you know that you're talking about one friend, then you know that the correct answer has to be C. Let's take a look at one last example. When he was just 12, Timothy broke the men's and women's records by completing the race in less than 8 hours. So, because we see this apostrophe S, we automatically assume that this is probably a question with possessives. But sometimes you might see these kinds of questions where it's actually not asking you for a possessive or a contraction. So, what we need to figure out is, do we need a possessive of the word record? So when we're talking about the verb to break a record, we mean that we're kind of beating the highest number or the best score in something. So if Timothy broke the men and women's records, it's not actually a possessive that we want because nothing belongs to the record. So what we want to do is go through the options and eliminate all of those that are talking about a possessive because we know that that's not what we want. So in option A, it is a possessive form of the singular noun, a record. which is wrong, so we can eliminate option A. And then in option B, it's not a possessive, so we'll leave that for now. And we also see another apostrophe in option C, which tells me that it's the possessive form of a plural noun, records, which can't be right. So we can eliminate option C as well. So that leaves us with only two options, options B and option D. The only difference between the two is that in option D, we have a comma after. So that means the structure of the sentence in option D would be something like this. And what would be in between the two commas is this clause right here. Timothy broke the men's and women's records. So, if you've seen my previous video on commas and separating additional information, then you would know that the sentence should make sense without the information that's in between here. So let's test that out. When he was just 12, by completing the race in less than 8 hours. Since that clearly does not make sense, we know that there should not be a comma after the word records, so we can eliminate option D, and therefore we are only left with option B.